Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another edition of WOWSA Live with our co-host, Antonio Argüelles. Antonio?
Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches en cualquier día del lugar del mundo donde estén. Déjenme decirles que hoy literalmente vamos desde Hawái, pasando donde está Mike, pasando por California donde está Steven, la Ciudad de México y hasta el otro lado del mundo en Donagadí está nuestro amigo Mark Hamilton. Entonces desde México es WOWSA Live.
Thank you very much.
Well, we're very happy, Stephen. We have two great pilots with us today. Hopefully, Dave Harper from Catalina will join us, and also Captain Mike Oram from the English channel. But let's start our conversation with these two not only great pilots, but I consider them also my friends. And I have to, as I said in the book, they were very instrumental in taking me from one side of Molokai to Oahu, and from Northern Ireland to Scotland. So you want to start, Stephen?
Yes. So just to put this in place, Antonio, you wrote a book. Just explain the book and how Mark and Mike actually participated in those two.
Well, the book is called the Forever Swim, and in that book I tell stories. You know me, and I like to tell stories, and I tell stories about my life and how I grew up in Mexico, and then I went to the States. But also I wrote about each one of my 7 swims, and coincidentally, Stephen, you and I have talked about from the Ocean 7, which one are the 2 toughest ones. And people always think that the coldness of the North Channel, it's very, very complicated and makes the swim difficult. But also the hot water of Molokai, but especially, I would never forget the big waves in Molokai. So we're starting our conversation with for me, my 2 toughest swims. And I remember when Molokai didn't start on a good start because we couldn't begin where they usually begin to swim, and maybe Mike can tell a little bit more about that. But what I have to remember is that those big waves. I mean, there were some moments during my swim at night that I couldn't see the kayak and I couldn't see the boat. I mean, they were just so big, the waves. They were just pushing from one side to the other. And that was a swim that made me doubt if I was going to finish. When I stopped at 10 hours, and Nora Toledano has also joined us, and I asked Nora and Ariadna at the boat how far had it gone. They said, well, you swam for 10 hours and you're not even halfway. So imagine that you're looking at at least more than 20 hours. And in those moments, I had big doubt. I had self-doubt that I was going to be able to accomplish it. That was a very difficult moment. And then with Mark, we tell the story in the book. And previously, he was saying that you want the swimmer to be relaxed and be prepared for the swim. But just imagine that I go to bed, and after talking to Captain Quinton Nelson. And for those of you who know Quinton, Quinton is a gentleman of very few words. He's very, very, very scarce with words. And I'm trying to get him to tell me, a little bit more what's going to happen. And the only thing he says, right now, the conditions are not good for tomorrow. There might be a small possibility, but if you can go to bed tonight and wait for me tomorrow at 7 o'clock, I will tell you if that happens. And it was literally, I went to bed, I woke up and it was raining, and suddenly Mark and Quinton arrive, and at 6:45, Quinton tells me we're going in. And there's a great picture in the book when we are shaking hands. Remember, Mark? that I said,
exercises in Donegal, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you think we're going to be able to do it, that we have a deal. And 30 minutes later, I was swimming, and it was a fantastic swim. I had tough moments, but people, when they ask me when was the moment that I was the most afraid in my swims, is when we landed. The landing in that swim was really complicated, and it was a tough day. So I'm very happy to see you, gentlemen. I don't know if this is going to happen, but I just did Catalina back and forth. Hopefully, I will be doing the English Channel back and forth. So maybe when I'm 70, I'll be able to complete the Ocean 7 back and forth. But you guys are the last ones that I want to see, because the North Channel and Molokai, that's going to be a tough swim. So
North Channel's never been done twice, Antonio. Never on a solo. Never there and back by one person, though.
Yeah. Can I, for listeners who aren't familiar with the North Channel or the Molokai Channel, can Mark start off, and then Michael, can you explain where the channel is and what is the traditional route? What is the ideal route? And so people who are not familiar with these locations can understand the difficulties and challenges.
Yeah, sure. The North Channel basically is the channel of water that flows between Northern Ireland and Scotland. It's a funnel. So basically you have the Atlantic Ocean coming in from the top, and you have the Atlantic Ocean coming in from the bottom, and they get squeezed together, and that area is called the North Channel, between essentially Ireland and England and Scotland and Wales. So it's a very tough piece of water. It's cold. The weather isn't great. The winds are unforgiving. The jellyfish are tough. As Antonio's mentioned, the landing on the far side is pretty much always difficult. It's kind of sheer cliffs. The tides are incredibly strong, and it's tough to get weather windows within any tidal window in this part of the world. We kind of get used to it, but from a swimmer's point of view, Antonio was here for about for 2 weeks. Antonio, 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah. Getting acclimatized, first of all, to the water, but just waiting for that right moment within that tidal window that he had as well in August that year in 2017. And it's tough. It's tough, as Antonio has said. Quentin Nelson, nelsonboats.co.uk, they're one of the pilot boats. Quentin is a man of the sea, has spent his life as a fisherman in that part of the water, escorting people backwards and forwards. It's impossible to get it 100% right with the weather. It changes within literally 10 minutes in this part of the world. And you can leave on what's a beautiful morning, flat calm seas, very little wind. 2 hours later, it could be blowing force 5, force 6. So it's very, very difficult to try and predict. And I think, Antonio, in the book as well, you mentioned that there was one day we and Nora thought was going to be good to go before we actually did go, and another swimmer had went with another pilot service, and they come back after 5 or 6 hours because at lunchtime that day it had just blown up, and the swimming conditions were impossible. So that's where I am, Steve. That's where we are in this part of the world. That's the North Channel in a brief.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one question. You actually sort of just skipped over this word, and you said, yeah, we have jellyfish.
Yeah.
You don't have just little jellyfish. I mean, you have, can you explain how big these jellyfish are and what type they generally are?
Yeah, they're just common jellyfish. They affect people in so many different ways. You can get little small ones, literally this size. You can get big ones this size. The problem is that the tentacles can run for 2, 3, 4 meters, and that's where the stings are. Obviously, that's the sore part. We have had swimmers who have had to cancel or pull their swim because of their reactions to jellyfish stings. We've had other swimmers that have been stung, and they seem to be reasonably immune to it. So it's like a bee sting. It can affect people in so many different ways, and it's difficult. They're there. What we look for is whenever it's a good day, when it's a bright sunny day, they actually come down within the water levels, and you can normally swim over the top of them without touching them. On the grayer days or days when you get clouds coming over the sun, they'll rise back up again within the water, trying to get more heat. And that's when you can literally come and literally swim straight into them. So quite often whenever we hit a plume of jellyfish, which could last a mile, realistically.
Oh, wow.
What we try and do is get the crew for the swimmer to be on that side of the boat, to be watching. The boat that Quentin uses, it's a 52-foot XRNLB, X lifeboat. So it's a very big boat. So we can have swimmers at the front of the boat with whistles and bells. They can whistle to the swimmer to warn them there's jellyfish and point them out of the direction, point them away from the jellyfish. So yeah, I skip over it because people get scared about it.
Yeah,
it's one of the reasons that people go North Channel, no jellyfish. But it's as you said before, Steve. It's why it's recognised as one of the toughest. It's another one on the list of tides, weather windows, jellyfish, temperature. The list goes on for the North Channel. It is a tough swim.
Yeah, and on the other side of the world, we have Captain Twigg-Smith. Warm water, beautiful water. And for the listeners, can you explain where you are, where people go, where they start, where they land, and some challenges that they will face?
Yes, we are in the awesome state of Hawaii. And the swimmers swim from Molokai, which is one of the islands, to Oahu. So this is called the Molokai Channel or the Kaiwi Channel. And yes, there's rough water. I mean, this is really a rough water swim. We go when there's waves out there. Antonio was talking about the waves, and it is a warm water swim, and the weather is a little more predictable, I would say, than what Mark was talking about, because we'll have changes, but normally we can gauge it a little better. As far as we'll see a few days that might be better than others. And so that the swim really is based on the weather, and we can usually focus on getting the right day pretty good. But there always are chances with the currents. That's the one thing is the currents, we cannot tell what the current is going to be doing. Ideally, you want to have a current flowing behind you, pushing you towards Oahu. And that really helps to make the speed better and to make the course straighter. We want the straightest course possible. And so what also helps with that is the wind. If the wind is from a east-southeast direction, it'll practically blow the swimmer straight towards Oahu, which really helps, make it a better swim.
Yeah. And you've taken the fastest swimmer, Antilla Manioki, and the slowest swimmer, Antonio, and
thank you, Steven. Thank you, Steven.
And you've had a 12-hour swim, and you've had over a 24-hour swim. What were the differences between those two?
Every swim is very different. People try and say, what's the common thing or whatever, but they're all very different. And Antonio's swim, it took longer because we couldn't start at our normal spot. We had to go down to the other end of the island because the surf was too big at the beach we normally start at. And so that took a more diagonal course across the channel. And you tend to be going more against the general currents when you go on that track. And there's a shelf that you need to get up on top of. And when you come from the south like that, you get on the shelf where it's closer to the island, and there tends to be currents that move away from the island there. Whereas the course we normally try to take, you get up on that shelf sooner, further away from the island, so that then once you're up on that shelf, you don't have these currents so much. We call it climbing the hill, because literally you're going from 800 meters deep to maybe 90 meters deep.
Oh,
and so this shelf, the water is moving around on there. Sometimes it doesn't allow the swimmer to get up on there. So the course that Antonio took we were coming more from the south, and he had a lot of trouble coming into the island. We got pushed along the edge of the shelf for a long way.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was caused it to take. That's what really took his swim took so long. With Attila, we left at the normal spot, but a little bit like what Mark was talking about, the weather did get a lot stronger than we anticipated. We had higher winds. It was rougher out there, and he had to just power through. But I think the rough water, he was able to body surf a little bit, and that helped his time because of that. And then also right at the end of his swim, we hit a current that we're going to go for Sandy Beach, but the progress turned out to be more towards Makapu'u, even though we're headed for Sandy Beach. So I just told Jeff Kozlovich, who was the kayaker there, I said, we should just go for Makapu'u because we're going to get there a lot faster. And so once we made that turn, we just took off and went right in behind Makapu'u and got out of the water there.
Great. And Antonio was talking about the waves are so big in Hawaii, where suddenly he's in the water looking up at your boat, and then the next moment he's looking down at your boat. What are the size of the ocean swells on the Molokai Channel?
Well, I mean, it's like if you see my boat there in the background, I'm up on the bridge. That's probably, 2 meters. I'm sitting about 2 meters above the level of the water. And there'll be times when, we will go down in a trough and we won't see the swimmer and the kayaker, and they're not even that far away. They're like, 100 meters, 200 meters away, and we don't see them because the level change in the ocean like this. So that's why we have radios and lights, and we like to use those to keep track of everybody.
Got it. And in Hawaii, you use a kayaker next to the swimmer. So you have the boat, the swimmer, and the kayaker. Mark, in the North Channel, is it just the swimmer himself or herself that is swimming along the boat?
Not necessarily. Some swimmers prefer to have kayakers as well. Some swimmers prefer to stay on one side of the boat. So what we find with Clinton's boat, because the exhaust fumes actually go straight up, they don't come out of the sides or come out the back or anything. The swimmer can swim on either side of the boat, but we like to keep them in the lee, which obviously gives them that little bit of protection if the swell does get up a little bit. And at that time, sometimes they do want kayakers there from the start. Sometimes they'll want kayakers in for parts of the swim as a comfort factor more than anything. So we can do both. The majority probably in recent years, probably no kayakers, but certainly going back 10 years ago, the kayakers would have been more common here, yeah.
Got it.
Steven.
Yeah, go ahead.
Steven, Dave Harvey has joined us from California. Okay. How are you? Hi, Dave.
How's that?
Good, great. Well, welcome
directly
to WOWSA Live.
From sunny California.
Southern coronavirus, California. Here we are.
Yeah. Well, great to see you.
And welcome to the show. What we were doing, we were discussing the North Channel, and then we moved over to the Molokai Channel. And now, if you can explain to our audience who may not be familiar with the Catalina Channel, roughly, what is the Catalina Channel? Where is it located? How far is it? What are some things that swimmers and you and the crew have to be aware of in the channel?
Sure. The Catalina Channel, we start typically from Catalina Island, which is off the coast of Southern California. It's approximately 20 miles from point to point, where we come in at Palos Verdes, which is just above San Pedro, Los Angeles area. Our channel, on face value, looks to be a relatively easy swim until you start. Our currents change. Swell typically comes out of the west going to the east. And I guess the biggest factor that we have to deal with is when the wind starts to pick up. We're relatively large boats. My Pacific Star is 65 foot, so we catch a lot of wind. And it tends to try and blow us off course. With a fast swimmer, it's not that much of a problem. With some of the slower swimmers, it's a lot of trying to maneuver to stay on that line to hit that spot. Occasionally we have to change. I was listening to Michael talk about how he changed to the different spot in order to accomplish the swim. We do that probably about 30% of the time due to the wind factor that picks up in the late morning, early afternoon. So we watch that. We watch that pretty good to make sure that we can make a successful crossing.
And one of the things that is unique about the Catalina Channel is actually you typically start at night, late at night. So typically the first, 5 to 8 hours is swum in pitch darkness. Is that correct?
Yeah. With the budget cutbacks, they've turned off the street lights, and it gets pretty dark out there.
Yes. And as a pilot, do you have to comfort not only the swimmer but the crew? Of course, they know this is going to occur, but many times your swimmers, the first time they've seen such darkness is out there.
We keep the swimmers, like I say, our prevailing swell comes from the west, goes to the east. So as we're traveling, we keep the swimmer within 10 to 20 meters off the starboard side of the boat. Boat's pretty well lit up. If it doesn't bother the swimmer, then the boat's pretty well lit up. We can see them very clearly because of the distance that they are away from the boat. Sometimes even closer than that, depending on what the current conditions will allow. So we haven't had a real issue with the swimming in the darkness. We do start 10, 11 o'clock at night because that's when the seas are the calmest.
Got it.
We can make good distance with a flatter sea, and hopefully with a back current to help push us along a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
So talking about currents, Stephen, once in your lifetime as a long distance swimmer, you have to have the oceans on your side. I mean, that's doesn't happen all the time. Mariel and Nora had a wonderful time when they did Tsugaru, and this last summer when I went to try to do Catalina back and forth, I remember Dan Simonelli and Dave told me that we had to start at 4:55, and I said, why 4:55? Because that's the exact moment when the currents and the tides are going to be in our favor. And if you manage to get to Catalina in less than 12 hours, you will have currents coming back. And that's what happened. So it's a wonderful swim. You really timed it very, very well. And I have to say that I had current in my favor on the way up and on the way down. A wonderful day that day, Dave. I really appreciated your help. And one thing that, for those who are afraid of starting a swim at night in Catalina, the sharks don't come late at night. They will come at some other time during the day. And it's always fun because when you arrive to Catalina, you can see dolphins. I've seen dolphins several times, but also the sea lions. They don't know what's happening. Somebody getting into the water. And but the other thing that's really interesting is, as you mentioned, the boat lies you very well, but the kayak. In Catalina, you have a kayak, which is always close to you. So that's I find that Catalina at night it's not a big problem.
Yeah, and Antonio, the relationship, all these three gentlemen escorted you on very difficult swims. What is the relationship of you to these extremely important lifesavers, basically, you out there. And in particular, then I'd like to hear from Mark and Mike and David. What is your relationship to the swimmer? Not only Antonio, but other people who you've taken across your channels.
Well, I think the most important thing, more important thing for me, Stephen, is that you have to trust them. And I really get very upset when I hear swimmers saying that that they don't finish a swim because it was the fault of their captain, because they took him out on a bad day. And Mark was saying earlier how frustrating it is for the crew and for the observers when a swimmer cannot succeed in their swims. So Mark and Michael and Dave, when I approach them, the first thing that comes into my mind is that I do not know more than them, because there are some swimmers that because they are able to read the wind wuru and the water temperature, they think they can know how to navigate, and that's just the first thing is I don't know anything about the swim. Two, I don't discuss with them. If they say you have to start at this point or you have to keep increase your speed or whatever they say, I trust them a lot. And as you see, I like to think that my relationship with the three of them after my swims, we kept in touch, and I really, and as I said in the book, in the when I thank people, the different people that I thanked in my book, is I thank them because usually the pilots don't get any credit. So today for me it's a very special day, because it's a way that I, as a swimmer, can thank you, because if it weren't for you guys, I would have been from one side to the other.
Yeah. And then starting with Mark, what is your relationship between yourself and the swimmers that you take across, success and failure?
We try to help the swimmer every way that we can. And I suppose if I talk about the relationship that Antonio and I have first, that might explain how we develop those relationships with the swimmers who really are only here for a short period of time. They're here to do a job. They're here to get the job done. And what Antonio and I have done since his swim, we founded a new swimming association here with your guidance as well, Steve, called the North Channel Swimming Association. We're a very young association, but what we're doing is we're providing a different way for the swimmers to be here. We still provide full ratification, full observers, all the rest of that, sticking by all the rules, which is paramount, that everybody has to do the same thing. But because of the relationship that was developed with Antonio Swim in the North Channel, we have moved on to create this association. So that probably sums up how good a relationship we can have with the swimmers. Antonio's has been fantastic, obviously, and we really appreciate the thanks. Certainly from our point of view, from Quentin's point of view, from my point of view, we have a lot of swimmers who think that they can go out and just do it on their own. It has to be a team approach. It has to be a team effort. If we, as a crew, or as pilots, tell the swimmer that they're going to have to pick up the pace in the North Channel, we mean it, and we mean it very seriously. One of the things that we often discuss, and Antonio had this on his head as well, is that you have to be on the Scottish side before that third tide really turns. Otherwise, you will not land. We've had this. We've seen it with Pat Grad, and so many other swimmers where they have been so close to the shore, but we just cannot get them in. That last could be 500 yards because the tides are so strong. So I think from a swimmer's point of view, they need to, as Antonio said, they need to trust the pilots. They need to trust the crew and listen to what we're telling you. We do this, X number of times per swimming season here. We have done it for X number of years. The swimmers are here for a short time. Put faith in your chosen pilot. They're the ones who want to get you across the line. They want to get you over there. And hopefully in as good a time as possible, obviously, as well.
Yeah. And Michael, in Hawaii?
Yeah, I remember Antonio, a lot of things that I can tell about the swimmer right away, and how their swim will be is the questions they ask when they come to the pre-swim meeting. And Antonio was asking a lot of the right questions, so I knew he was going to do well.
Yeah, yeah. And David, you in the Catalina Channel?
I agree with Mark. You know, the swimmers are here for a short time. Our main objective is to have a successful crossing. We work extensively with a lot of kayakers. There are some really good ones. A lot of swimmers like to bring their own kayakers that aren't so good, and that can really cost to swim. As far as Antonio goes, Dan Simonelli and myself, we looked at what the predictions were going to be, what the swell models were going to be, brought our ideas to Antonio, and he was receptive. And fortunately, he could do his part, and we had a very successful double crossing. Some of the swimmers don't believe us, like the other captains were saying. They really have to trust the pilots. Well, we're there, we're on the water almost every day. Sometimes the swell models will show one thing, we get out there, it's a totally different thing. So we don't really know what to expect until we get out on the water. So as long as they trust us, we can have a good crossing.
Yeah, thank you. And you've had such long careers, but I've always been curious, what got you into the sport of channel swimming? Mark, you and I were talking before, and you had a very interesting path to this chosen vocation, and Michael and David, after that, just explain how you got into channel swimming.
Yeah, my association is with Quentin, who's one of the recognized pilots, obviously, for the North Channel. I got into boats, and then I made friends with Quentin. We developed a very strong friendship. We're still a very close friendship. And he came back into piloting in 2012, 2013. Previous to that, he had piloted Maggie Kidd, who still holds the youngest female record way back in 1988. And that's way before there was GPS or anything like that, way before there was proper probably training regimes, etc., etc. So I got involved back then with Quentin. Really, I came along. I work on the boat with him. I also guide other swimmers as well. I do pretty much everything that needs to be done, being honest, on the boat. But yeah, that's my background. I actually work in the local university as a full-time job. So the piloting and observing and working on the boats during the summer for the swimmers is really just a sideline. It's just a hobby for me. But it takes up a lot of time, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I really, really enjoy it.
Got it. And Michael in Hawaii?
Yeah, well, the Molokai Channel is known as, the championship, world championship canoe racing channel also, as well as kayaks and one-man canoes. So I got involved in paddling that race, the Molokai Hoi. And that was back in 1990, the first time I did it. And since then, I did it for a number of years, probably about 10 years. And then I got my boat. And so once I got my boat, paddlers would ask me to escort them. And so probably about 2003, I started escorting canoe races, kayak races, surf ski. And then in 2013, a fellow escort boat captain wanted me to come and help him because he had to go and do another race, a sailing race from Kauai to from Oahu to Kauai, and he asked me to do a swim. I was like, swim? People swimming from Molokai to Oahu? Are you nuts? And no, I was there. Like, he's like, oh no, it's a relay. So we went and did the relay, Molokai to Oahu, and the relays are pretty good because they're faster. But that was my first one, 2013. So then, after that, just kept doing more and more of them.
Got it. And David, how did you get involved?
Well, we are primarily a scuba diving boat.
Got it.
And when I moved down from Redondo Beach to 22nd Street Landing in San Pedro, I was parked next to a boat called the Outrider. I don't know if anybody knows the Outrider, but John Pittman was the captain. He did channel swims. That's all he did with the Outrider. He learned from his father, Mickey Pittman.
Got it.
We became pretty good friends. And one night he asked me if I would like to come out and see what a swim was all about. For some reason or somehow, he picked the flattest night possible, and it was beautiful. Boat didn't roll at all. Little did I know that was the exception to the rule. So I worked with John for a couple of years, doing the swims, escorting, and he wanted to retire and asked if I would be interested in taking over his spot. He would refer to us because we were a little bit more familiar with people in the water than the typical fish boats that are at our landing. A little bit more comfortable with dealing with people in the water because of our scuba diving background. And I met a couple of the board members from the Catalina Channel Federation, and nice folks, good program, safety being the priority. And I thought, sure, let's give it a go. And since then, we've been doing a number of swims a year, and I just I have a good time. It's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of good people out there.
Great. You mentioned something about the people on the boat. I don't want names or anything, but all three of you, if you could describe the best crew that you had, and maybe give an example of, like, what are the kind of crew members that you definitely do not want on your boat. And I think this is very important for people to understand. Like, if you're going to participate, you're going to help a swimmer, you really want to have supportive crew. And Mark and Michael and David, if you could explain, how do crew members prepare for this? Go ahead, Mark.
I suppose one of the biggest things is knowing the swimmer, knowing how the swimmer does perform in the water, knowing how the swimmer is going to be after 3 hours, after 6 hours, after 10 hours, or whatever. The next thing we look for is communication. We have had swimmers on board where the crews didn't speak any English at all. And it proves very, very difficult to try and communicate with the crew and therefore communicate with the swimmer. One of the things that we do have in the North Channel quite a lot is hypothermia. It's a very real thing, and it's a very, very dangerous thing here. And we need to be, after 3-4 hours, we need to be assessing the swimmer to see how they're doing, how they're responding. And if it gets to the stage where the crew aren't communicating with the swimmer, then we find that quite difficult. The best crew, good communicators, obviously friendly. Well used to being on boats is another thing. We do get some crew members who get quite seasick, and that adds pressure to us as crews and as captains as well. Yeah, that's probably the main thing, Steve. Friendly, be open to direction, communication, and be used to being on boats for a long time.
Yeah. And Michael, you?
Yeah, I think the seasickness is probably the biggest factor. So the kayakers will definitely weed themselves out in that regard. The part of the crew that usually is the toughest is the feeder, because the feeder is there at the request of the swimmer, and we don't know whether they're going to get seasick or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And it can be challenging if they get very seasick, because then there's nobody to do their job. And so then my kayakers have to fill in that void. So that's why I like to have 2 feeders, because then at least, they can share the workload there.
Yeah, thank you. And David?
Well, our situation's a little unique in the sense that the boat crew, I made them myself. They're all my sons.
God.
We work together on the scuba trips, the film industry trips, and the swims. They're all highly trained. They're medical emergency first responder trained. We've had a couple of cases, as Mark was saying, about hypothermia. They're trained to watch the swimmers. And if something unusual happens or they feel that something's not quite right, we like to check it out. Again, safety being the priority aboard the Pacific Star. We want to make sure that everybody's safe, sane, and hopefully that leads to a completion. Kayakers in the channel crossing, as I mentioned before, most are really good. We know most of the really good ones, and we like it when we see those guys coming. They know what they're doing. They know how to keep a swimmer on a straight line. So yeah, crew's very important. And we like to, as I say, keep it as safe as possible. And the crew, the guys on the deck, they're the guys that are going to do that.
And you mentioned safety, which is another area I think we need to at least alert the listeners to. If you could explain, not necessarily, we all know that you know how to deal with emergency situations or hypothermia, sharks, jellyfish, etc. But what are some things that you would recommend and tell your crew members, not your own sons in your case, David, but the visitors, the coaches, the feeders, the kayakers who aren't as experienced as you? What are some of the bits of advice that you give those people relative to your own waters in the North Channel, Molokai Channel, and Catalina Channel? Go ahead, Mark.
Be aware is the main thing. Be alert. No two swims are ever the same, certainly here, and I'm sure it's probably the same for all the Ocean 7. In general, obviously, the swimmers' crew need to be aware that they are on a boat. It can be a dangerous place to be. They need to be aware that there is going to be ropes, there is going to be fenders, there is going to be things that they don't normally face. Be safe and be alert is the main thing. Obviously, as I said before, they need to know the swimmer. We've had swimmers turn up with crew that they've never met before. That's not a good situation to be. Now, I understand that not every swimmer can afford to bring their own crew with them. Antonio actually brought a great crew with him that know him very, very well, but that doesn't always happen. They need to know what the swimmer is going to be like, as I say, after 3 hours, 6 hours. They need to know if the swimmer is giving them direction. They need to listen. They need to do what they're told. But they also need to be prepared to pull the swim. In the situation where it gets that bad, it has to be the crew that pulls the swim. And the swimmer has to have complete confidence in their crew to do that for their own health and safety and for their own well-being. At times, we have had a situation, one situation where we've had a lifeboat called out for somebody who was fairly seriously ill. And it wasn't pleasant for any of us, and we really don't want to do that again. So.
Yeah. And Michael?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about the equipment. And most important piece of equipment, especially for the swimmer, is a very good light that they wear, preferably on their head, so that I can see where they are at all times, and everybody else can too. And the kayakers all carry lights too, because we start in the evening, about 5 or 6 in the evening, and we go all night. So we need lights that go all night. And then, basically, like Mark was saying, paying attention, listening to what the kayaker's telling you, listening to what the captain's saying, and just following directions, real simple things.
Yeah, thank you. And David?
The again, I agree with Mark and Michael. The kayaker, as far as our swims goes, a very important piece of equipment. I know that it's an extra cost to the swimmer, and some swimmers have tried to get around that by bringing a friend that doesn't know how to kayak. In a situation, in an emergency situation, the kayaker is the first person that's going to be to the swimmer. So they really need to know what to do in a situation like that, which is why we really stress a good kayaker that knows what he's doing, stays with the swimmer, and again, as Michael said, be alert to the swimmer, because that's the person that's closest and going to be the first responder.
Yeah.
I have a question, Stephen, for our friends. I guess one of the toughest thing that a swimmer can face is getting pulled out of the water. And for those who have experienced it, it's a very heartbreaking and it's very difficult. And that moment is not something that happens overnight or over a couple of seconds. When do you know a swimmer is deteriorating? You know, when do you know he's getting in trouble? Do you have any signs that you're looking at to know if the swimmer is okay, or if he's going to hit that wall?
Go ahead, Mark.
I suppose I go first. Yeah, people talk about stroke rate. Stroke rate's a reasonable indicator, but it's not the be all and end all. We would look obviously at the start in the first hour. I would be watching to see what that swimmer's stroke is like, what their hand shape is like, how often do they kick. Whenever they kick, does their heel break the water? Does it not break the water? So you get a kind of mental picture from the start of the swim as to what that swimmer normally swims like. That would be assessed all the time, and you always keep a watching eye on it. We also listen whenever it comes to a feed. How do they communicate? Do they sound as if they're slurring their words? Do they swim basically the same distance from the boat 3 hours into the swim or 5 hours into the swim? Are they reasonably communicative whenever they stop the feed? Will they follow direction? One example, I'm not going to name names. We had a female swimmer who got totally obsessed with one strand of hair that had come out of her swimming cap. And she tried to tread water for 5 minutes to put this back in again. And as soon as she started swimming, she swam in completely the wrong direction to the boat. Now, at that point, in our eyes, the swim was finished. Thankfully, her crew agreed, and they pulled her, and she was still able to get out of the water. The ones that are difficult are the ones whenever they become so hypothermic and it's been missed or maybe not seen or maybe not noticed well enough that they are totally focused and they won't stop, even for feeds or anything else. They just get totally focused and keep going. And that's when it gets difficult. That's when it gets hard to try and communicate to the swimmer to say, right, this is over. We don't want to do this. We really wanted you to do well, but this is it. This is over. And it's to save your life, essentially.
Michael?
Yeah, for me, it's especially when they come in for a feeding, I listen to their voice and the strength of their voice, the things they're saying, that a lot of times tells me where they're at in their swim. The other metric I can use is the distance they travel between feedings. As that rate comes down, I can tell that they're hurting. I can tell how much, whether the current is doing that or whether it's just the swimmer's hurting. So these are factors. And then of course, I always leave it up to, usually the feeder is the person I speak to first, because they're the one that knows the swimmer the best, has trained with them before, knows what they've been through. And so, this discussion starts there if the swim needs to end early.
David?
Yeah, on the Catalina swims, they're certified, and we have observers from the Swim Federation that are checking the stroke counts, keeping in contact with the swimmers. As the pilot, I'm watching them every minute. and we try to spot deviations, like you say, how they swim, what they're if they're holding that steady line, straight line, if they're starting to take longer feed breaks, 30 seconds, a minute for the Catalina, that's a good time. But when they start getting into 2 or 3 minutes, we just get blowed off. And at that point, we'll try to encourage them to shorten that feed in order to keep on line. And we do rely quite a bit on the observers. These guys are well trained by the Federation, and most of them can spot deviations or problems that might be leading to anxiety of the swimmer. So as far as pulling a swimmer, it's not just my decision. I mean, in the end it is, but we concur with the observers, talk to our deck crew before making a decision like that. Because there's a large investment and certainly just the feeling of non-accomplishment. We don't like to see it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I mean, this has been, all of us could be listening to you for hours on end. And Antonio, did you have any last few questions?
I have 2 last comments. The first one is for you, Michael. In this times of being constrained at home, many of us, Nora Toledano is watching, Mariel is watching, and we all give talks. And sometimes I listen to the talks. And now I want to hear from you, Mike. How big was the shark? Because Nora and Mariel, every time they tell the story, the shark gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And sometimes, I think it was a whale. So I think it was a little fish about this big. But can you tell us how big was the shark that Mariel and Nora found?
Well, on their swim, I did not see a shark. I personally did not see a shark.
Thank you very much.
I will tell you this. After they said they saw the shark, their rate picked up pretty good. And they were right with us.
That's good. And then big news for open water swimming in Mexico. Rene Martinez, who's here, and he has done the Triple Crown, was so excited about your talks that Mike, he says he wants to do Molokai in the near future. So we're going to have another Mexican going to Molokai, and hopefully Ricardo will be joining the open water swimming community. No, Stephen, it was a great talk. It's wonderful to have you guys, to see you. Let me tell you, the next week, for all our listeners, we're going to have 2 great women with us, Esther Nunez from Argentina, and Tita Llorens. It will be a program that it's going to be in Spanish. So we'll see how we deal with that. But next week, the usual time, 8:30 Pacific Standard Time and 10:30 Mexico City. It was a pleasure. Nice seeing you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all, guys. Thank you very much indeed. It's nice to be appreciated.
Shaka, nice.
Adios.
Mike.
Adios.
Right.
Adios.
See you guys on the water.